and finally breaking free of the northern states and their influence. Many of the select businesses, they didn't lend money easily to any business. What they wanted people in transportation, automobiles when that became the thing, railroads, steamboat lines. Many of these people, when it became known that they were involved in the Knights of the Golden Circle and the government began to investigate, you'd find fake deaths where somebody would mysteriously die and disappear. And if you follow the records in the history, you'll find out that somebody doing the same thing popped up on the other end of the country. They moved people around as they needed, but they kept funneling more money into this, more money into this. This money was hidden and buried. Guns were purchased with the money. Stashes were set aside. In most of your major control points, like St. Louis, Vicksburg, Pittsburgh, people asking, well, you know, the Golden Circle stash is up in Pennsylvania and Ohio. Yeah. There's a lot of them here because there are control points to these rivers. And the intention was that once they went to fight the Civil War again, they would have stashes in circles around each one of these key cities, that they had money and they had guns, they could buy what they needed, or they had the guns to seize what they needed and take the government. As time went on, more and more people began to fall away from this. They were tired of fighting. They were tired of war. The group began to lose membership so fast because the incentive was gone. The hurt died when another generation died out, and the next generation just was more reluctant to fight and give up their lives. So as the group started to fall apart, and this came about during the roughly 1870s or so, 1875, the remaining members, which had been the higher level members, realized that they had to start condensing all these stashes before they were totally lost, before nobody knew where they were, and pull these into larger depositories. So they started with the big stashes that they had, and they started to collect them and move them into caves or into vaults where they could store a lot. And I've seen pictures and I've seen drawings where you've got a cave that was cut into the side of a mountain using slave labor to do it. And the notes on it say that there were as many as 1,000 slaves that were working on the cave for so many years to build it. And the diagram shows 20 mule teams with the wagons on and the mules on lined up in one of these caves. Now, is this possible? I don't know. You know, the pyramids were built. Nobody knows how that could have happened either. With enough manpower, I'm sure that this could have happened. But I've seen the sketches that come from the old families. These stashes were pulled together and condensed. And as the bigger stashes were condensed, then they went to the smaller one, and the smaller one, finally, they ran out of people to pull these stashes together. And those are still sitting there. Those are the ones I mentioned before, that there may be 10 to 20,000 little stashes or more, because they're all over the place. The big stashes mostly were condensed into the big vaults because they worked from the top down in order of the value. But the little ones, they were never able to recover. Question?
About what years did you say that was that they condensed the big stashes?
I think that you don't find it recorded where they say in such and such a year we made this decision. It was more or less of an ongoing thing, that there was great fervor in collecting money and arms and hiding it for Second Civil War all the way up to about 1870. And it was at that point, after 10 years had gone by since the war, that things were dying down. The wounds were healing, the country was recovering, people were going about their business, and it was at that point that the membership started to fall off drastically. Pardon?
Around 1970 it started falling off.
1870. I do that too. I would say roughly 1870, because, like I say, it was an ongoing process. It depended where it was. In the northern states, it fell off faster. The southern states, where there was more hatred, it held on. In some of the areas, some counties in the southern states today, it's still there, all right? It never died down. It was passed on from generation to generation. And they still say, you know, if anybody came along and had the money in the arms to divide the country again, they'd be the first ones to volunteer. So it was an ongoing process when this happened, but the heads of the Knights of the Golden Circle realized that they were going to have to bring in whatever caches they could and hide these caches permanently, and they thought possibly for as long as 50 years. And as you got closer to 1900, oh, okay. I thought that was my clock. As you got closer to 1900, the remaining head people of the Knights of the Golden Circle started to see what else they could do with that money, because it was very apparent to them that there was not going to be another war, and here they were sitting on these huge caches, not knowing what to do with them. The organization formally closed its books in about 1916, where they closed all the accounts and closed the books and closed the record keeping and everything. There was still a lot of informal moving of stashes around that went on until about 1922. Now, in around 1947, 48, 46, a man came forward to claim that he was Jesse James. And he went under the name of J. Frank Dalton. And if Jesse James, by the way, I said Quantrell was the head of the Knights of the Golden Circle, Jesse James was treasurer. As people died out, the other people took over their job. Jesse James ended up being the head of the Knights of the Golden Circle to its end, because he was he outlived everybody, right? As other members died out, the remaining members that were faithful had to take over their jobs. So the core group got smaller and smaller and smaller until it finally ended up with the individual that went by the name of J. Frank Dalton. And if you assume he is Jesse James, then Jesse James did head the Knights of the Golden Circle all the way up to the end of it. Now, this man came forward. How many are familiar with the Jesse James story? Anybody? Does anybody want me to go in that direction for a little bit? Okay. See, there are so many avenues you can take to this. I'm gonna go backward a little bit. There's some people that are interested in history that say, well, Jesse James is okay, but that's all legend. What about actual history? There are a lot of things you can find out about the history of the Knights of the Golden Circle and the effect on this country. One of the biggest court decisions of the Supreme Court came about as a result of a suit revolving around the Knights of the Golden Circle, and a lot of people are not aware of this. As the war started out, Ohio was not brought into the war. Ohio was not at war, but there were certain heads of the Knights of the Golden Circle that lived in Ohio and Indiana and other northern states. And in order to stop the Knights of the Golden Circle, the military said, we have to get these head people, we have to try them for treason and hang them and stop this operation by nailing the heads of it. So they rounded up a half dozen people. I think there were 7 people total. And the military people went out and special trains by night. They would take these trains as close as they could. Men would get out in the middle of the night, and at 2, 3 in the morning, they would make a raid on the houses of these individuals and snatch them, kidnap them, take them on the train, and took them to a military installation. And they were held for treason. All right? In non-warring states, this was done. Now, it was argued that the military didn't have that kind of authority to do it. They didn't care. They took it.